I'm Amanda Meuwissen, local author in Chaska. And this panel, which has been pre-recorded, is going to be a reading of my work, as well as a prepared Q&A. But the questions aren't going to be focused on me, instead on some of the most frequently asked questions that I get from fellow writers, covering general writing advice, various ways to plot, world build, and just be more disciplined in your craft, as well as tips on both how to self-publish or to pursue a more traditional publisher in today's landscape. So first, a little background. I am a bisexual and happily married self-proclaimed geek. I struggle with whether to wear a costume since I would normally be cosplaying if we were in person, but decided on one of my own merch shirts. This and other fun items can be found on my website. I write primarily MM romance, the M meaning male, so romance between two men. And most of my works are urban fantasy, with a few exceptions of contemporary romance. I've been published since 2012. I have 12 titles out. A short story available through ebook that actually released today called The Immaculate Marlowe King for less than $2, since it's ebook only, easily found on Amazon. And lucky number 13 for my main books is set to release in November, which is the book I'm going to be reading to you from today. I average about 2 books a year, and hopefully some of the advice I share with you today will help you become more disciplined toward the writing that you produce as well. If you'd like to skip ahead past the reading and a few more things I'm going to discuss to just the advice, feel free. It'll probably be around the 15 to 20 minute mark if I'm guessing right. And then later I'm going to take all of this and I'm going to chop up little sections of it so that I can have a video for each question available on my website as well, besides what Convergence is going to have available. So my mentoring of other authors began with my work as managing editor for the indie publisher Big World Network several years ago. As much as I adore writing, I enjoy editing as well and helping people craft their own stories. I've helped edit over 60 novels and many more online publications, and I continue to edit on the side for friends while writing more of my own work. I'm going to be reading from my upcoming November release, as I mentioned, which is called Their Dark Reflections. I actually did a reading for this late last year before I'd even finished editing it or submitting it to my publisher, but that was only about 5 minutes worth, and I really wanted the chance to revisit this and share what's basically the last third of chapter 1, leaving you with the exciting initial cliffhanger of how this story begins. So since I'm not starting at the very beginning, a few things you need to know going in is that Sam is a personal assistant working for a wealthy young man who recently moved to town, Ed, and the two of them have started to become close, obviously attracted to each other, spending more time together and bonding over things like their favorite myths, which includes the Hades Persephone story inspired by more modern adaptations, which you'll understand why I bring that up when I read the chapter, or the part of the chapter. What Ed doesn't know is that Sam is actually a con man planning to rob him. And what Sam doesn't know is that Ed's sensitivity to the sun that keeps him mostly housebound is actually because he's a vampire. So with that, this is a portion of the first chapter of Their Dark Reflections, set to release on November 3rd. Out with you? Ed blinked at Sam, forgetting tact or subtlety whenever Sam flirted with him, which was often, but especially when he stood close, eyes flicking down and up his body with promise. We can still talk myths when we get back. Please? Oh, that word was unfair coming from Sam. I suppose I do need to get out more. Really? I mean, great. I thought I'd have to drag you kicking and screaming. It's not that I don't enjoy going out. I just feel safer at home. Don't worry, I'll protect you. Sam grinned at him. Ed blushed at the promise, though needing protection wasn't the problem. We'll do something simple with minimal forced mingling, I promise, Sam said, holding Ed's tablet with his calendar open. They were in their chosen chairs in the office again, where Sam had been helping Ed move his entire date book to digital. How about a movie or a show? We can get cocktails first with a late dinner afterward. I'll keep my own drinking to a minimum and even DD. You mean drive us? On your bike? Ed leaned back, torn between excitement and concern at the thought of holding on to Sam during the trip, feeling his pulse thrum beneath his hands and through their connected bodies. You'll love it. I guess that could be fun. Okay, it's a date. Sam startled, and Ed worried he'd said the wrong thing. He knew they couldn't be more than what they were, that he couldn't give in to their flirtations beyond a night out, but was it so wrong to want to pretend for a while? I'm sorry. I meant a date, Sam said. Definitely. Sam handled everything. Cocktails planned at a bar near the theater, A Midsummer Night's Dream playing, which was one of Ed's favorite plays. Then dinner at a nice restaurant down the block, all close together downtown so they could walk between locations and easily escape when they were ready to go home. Sam even chose something for Ed to wear. Are you sure I don't need a tie? It's the theater, Ed said when he came out of the bathroom the next evening dressed in black slacks, a green button-down, and a charcoal gray sweater. With the black and gray pea coat, it was all very fashionable, but still seemed too casual for a night out. No tie, Sam assured him. He looked sharp as well, in dark jeans, a blue sweater, and a heather gray blazer. For their date. I can't believe I'm finally going to see you eat, Sam said. I eat? Never in front of me. Well, tonight will be a first for many things then. Sam gazed at Ed like he was trying to memorize how he looked. Come here, Eddie. We have time yet, but there's something I've been wanting to do. He grasped Ed's hand, and for a moment Ed thought he was going to kiss him right there in the bedroom, but then he pulled him into the hallway and tugged on the cord for the ladder up to the widow's walk. Sam, here, I grabbed these from your dresser. Sam handed him the sunglasses he'd given him. The sun should be mostly set by now anyway. It's not only that, I really don't, just this once. I promise I won't let you fall. Sam grinned, and Ed scowled at him for the jab, but allowed himself to be led up to the roof. The light was still a little much, making him grateful for the sunglasses. But the sun had dipped low enough below the horizon that it cast beautiful colors across the sky. Since they stayed near the hatch, he didn't have to look out over the side, but simply watched the sunset. Once upon a time, Sam began, making Ed's chest grow warm as he realized what was about to happen. Hades was on Mount Olympus for a yearly council with his brothers. On his way home, he took the long route along a winding path down the mountain. He liked the gardens there, mostly because no one else ever frequented them, so he could enjoy their color and beauty without anyone gawking at him. No bloom he'd ever seen, however, was as beautiful as the goddess he found there that day. What are you staring at? She asked, completely unafraid of him, but also unaware of who she was speaking to. Persephone was in a foul mood after having a fight with her mother, who'd forbidden her to leave home. Willful and proud, she'd snuck out to the gardens anyway. She was all grown up and wanted freedom, but her mother still treated her like a child. She wanted to run away for good, but had nowhere to go. She told Hades all this, still not knowing his name, just needing someone to listen to her. You can come with me, he offered, utterly captivated by this fiery flower he'd found. It's not beautiful where I live, but your mother could never reach you there. Persephone finally, truly looking at Hades, realized how beautiful he was, and couldn't imagine such a handsome god living anywhere that wasn't remarkable. So she agreed. She got so lost in talking with him during the long trek down the mountain that she didn't realize they were descending all the way into the underworld until they came to the river Styx. You're him. You're Hades, she said. Yes, he answered, assuming their time together would end now that she knew the truth. Would you like to go home? But she surprised him. Why would I want that? Aren't you afraid of my darkness, dear? He asked. And Persephone said, No, you haven't seen mine yet. Sam's smile was soft, maybe even sad as he returned to the quote he'd first told Ed from that story. The space between them kept shrinking. Ed drawn in as Sam looked at him, certain that Sam began to tilt his head closer too. Sam's phone erupted, causing Ed to snap back. What is it? Sam answered sharply, his smile gone now, and his expression only dropped further. Tonight? I was on my way out. No, I understand. You're right. I did promise. I'll see you in 20. Something wrong? Ed asked. I've been helping some friends with moving plans, and I guess this is the only night they can pack up the heavier stuff. I promised to help, and oh, Ed said before Sam could finish. I'm really sorry, Eddie. You should still go. Enjoy the evening. I'll reimburse you for my ticket. Don't be silly. I'm sure I can find someone to take it at will call. I wouldn't want all your hard work getting me out of the house to go to waste. I'll make it up to you, Sam said, seeming more upset than Ed was, which he decided to take as a compliment. I'll call a lift so you can still have as many drinks as you want, and make sure you're safely on your way before I head out, okay? They left the roof and waited in the foyer for the car to arrive. When it did, Sam opened the door for Ed and joked, Are you sure you're not a ghost haunting this place and you can't actually cross the threshold? Ed smirked at him and made a grand show of walking out of the house. I stand corrected, Sam said, locking up behind them. The driver was waiting. Sam's bike, that Ed wouldn't get to ride on after all, was also waiting. Goodbye, Eddie, he said. Ed wished that didn't sound so final. Promise me, before you start your other job, you'll come back sometime and finish telling me that story. I promise. I promise. It wasn't the first time Sam had lied to Ed, but it hurt the most. He took a different route than the lift, making sure it was well out of view before he parked his bike away from the house in a place he'd chosen earlier. He walked back by cover of nightfall, so there was no chance of the neighbors seeing him. He'd stashed the needed supplies in the foyer closet, in a backpack he told Ed was his change of clothes. It had been, but it also contained the tools he needed to complete his job. Sam had hours to get everything done now that Ed was out of the house, but he planned to be swift if also careful. He'd leave no trace of the theft or his presence there once he was gone, and maybe Ed wouldn't ever find out. He'd wonder, though, what became of Sam Coleman when he never heard from him again. Sam ditched the blazer and took the gloves from his bag. He'd memorized everything he'd touched, so he knew exactly what needed to be wiped down before his escape. With the curtains drawn, he hardly had to be careful with his flashlight as he moved through the house. First, he'd remove his prints, since that would take the longest, and as he did, he also claimed several priceless trinkets Ed had forgotten he even owned until Sam cataloged them. Once that was done, barely an hour having passed, all that remained was the safe. The only thing Ed hadn't entrusted to Sam was the combination, but he'd given his whole life over to him otherwise, never once doubting that he could trust him. Jerry was right. The magnet opened the safe in seconds. There was hardly any challenge to it, no obstacles, just the ever-widening chasm in the pit of Sam's stomach that worsened when he found an unexpected item among the others. There was a photograph, beautifully shot in black and white, of Sam on the back patio looking out beyond the fence. Sam had no idea when Ed had taken it, though he had to have done so from one of the windows. He must have been embarrassed and stashed it as a memento. I take photographs whenever something beautiful catches my attention, he'd said. Sam felt 2 inches tall, but he had to push through it. He put the picture back and grabbed the flash drive. All he needed to do now was copy it onto his laptop and he could put it back, so that if Ed looked into the safe anytime soon, he wouldn't notice anything amiss. Sam also took one of the stacks of cash. There were so many in the safe, Ed wouldn't notice that either. He opened his laptop on the bedroom floor to start the transfer, but just as he slid the flash drive into place, a car pulled into the driveway. Sam stiffened. The lights were off inside the house, so it couldn't be the neighbors checking up on Ed when it looked like no one was home. After snapping his laptop shut, Sam shoved it into his backpack along with the cash, but he put the flash drive in his pocket, not wanting to risk it getting smashed. There was no time to replace it now. He'd have to bring it with him. He closed the safe and then hefted the backpack over one shoulder, padding quickly from the bedroom across the upper floor. Below, in the foyer, the front doors opened. It had to be Ed, but it had only been an hour. Sam heard Ed's voice, followed by a second voice just as he reached the parlor. This place is amazing. Thank you. I'm very happy here. How about we have that drink on the patio and I can give you a tour later? You mean of the bedroom? Wherever you want, Ed answered tellingly. Ed, who'd brought a man home and was getting him a drink, inviting him upstairs only an hour after he and Sam almost... Sam shook his head. He had no right to be upset. He ditched Ed. He was betraying him right now. But it still hurt that Ed could move on to someone else that same night. Their voices drifted from the foyer into the living room, and Sam hovered near the stairs. Once they were outside, he could leave right through the front doors. "I'm glad you came out tonight," the other man said. "So am I. I had other plans, but once those changed, there was only one thing on my mind." "Using me to get back at someone who stood you up?" "Oh no, trust me. I would never have done with him what I'm about to do to you." Sam was halfway down the stairs when Ed's voice trailed off. Ed didn't even sound like himself. Had Sam read him wrong? Was this the real Ed Simons he'd been waiting to find to make robbing him easier? Didn't feel easier. Sam kept going. He could still hear them out on the patio, the doors left open, but they were definitely outside. He should go. The front doors were right there, but as he stood before them, his feet turned toward the living room instead. He passed the radios, the old photographs he loved, even one of Ed's horrible cardigans draped over a chair. No, that was the sweater Ed had been wearing tonight. Nearing the patio, Sam could see them through the open doors. Ed was missing his sweater all right and starting to pull the tails of his shirt from his slacks as he crawled into the lap of the man sitting in one of the patio chairs. Ed prowled. Sam had never seen him prowl, or kiss someone, or touch anyone but him, yet now he was allowing the stranger to get very handsy on his ass and up the back of his shirt. The way Ed writhed into those touches caused spike after spike of ugly jealousy to tear through him. It shouldn't matter. He was always going to leave. Nothing could have happened between them, and if he'd let something happen, he'd still be leaving. He couldn't change that. But he also couldn't stand the sight of Ed kissing another man in his lap like that, tipping his head back to lick up his neck and then tearing into his throat with his teeth. Sam froze. There was so much blood suddenly, but Ed was quick to lap it up and not let any go to waste as the man tried to struggle, tried to push him off, but Ed held him down with no effort at all and drank until the man's eyes glazed over and he grew still. The horror that churned inside Sam made him feel like he was going to throw up. The missing persons. The bodies found. It wasn't the Kramers, it was Ed. Sam backpedaled into an end table in his haste to get away, and Ed's head snapped around, catching him standing there. His face was entirely different, twisted into an animal snarl with yellow eyes that glowed and fangs dripping blood onto his chin. 2 terrifying seconds passed with their eyes locked, and then Sam bolted for the front doors. If you'd like to know what happens next, you can find links to all my books through my website, amandameuwissen.com, Meuwissen being Meuwissen, or by Googling my name. I'm the only one. Everything is available on Amazon as ebook or paperback, and additional distributors as well. So now that we're past that, on to some writer advice. And I'm going to cover as many questions as I can without going over my hour to hour and a half time slot here. So often at conventions, when I'm able to converse with readers and fellow writers in person, these are the types of questions that come up. So we'll start with the most common one. What are some general advice that I would give to writers? So it feels cliche, and I always say this, but it seriously is the most important thing. Write every day. Once you get into that habit, you won't believe how much easier it is to stay in a writing mindset and come up with more exciting ideas to write about. Now, I know that actually writing every day won't always be possible, but you still need to try and to get into the habit or it won't stick. And it doesn't mean writing a chapter every day, maybe even just a sentence sometimes. It also doesn't mean writing what would be considered a perfect end product. I like to live by this really great quote from Sir Terry Pratchett, that the first draft is just you telling yourself the story. Get it down, get it written, then you can go back and edit and worry about making it something more polished. So this leads into the question of how do you go about getting into good writing habits? Developing discipline as a writer is the same as any good habit or bad habit that you want to break. I've heard varying numbers about how long it takes to make or break a habit, but the general rule is it takes a little over 2 months, so around 66 days for something to become routine. And I speak from experience here. Nothing is harder than those first 2 weeks, especially the first week of those 66 days. But if you can last that final push over 2 months of doing that same routine, the 3rd month is easy, and from there, it's no longer a challenge to keep consistent. That's why I also repeatedly tell people who ask me how to create good writing habits to do NaNoWriMo. If you're not familiar with that, it stands for National Novel Writing Month. It's the month of November every year where writers dedicate themselves to writing 50,000 words during those 30 days. might be the entirety of a single novel, since it's sort of a general word count, or maybe just the start if you write lengthier pieces. But it is still, really grand undertaking to do because it translates to over 1,600 words a day, which is easy when you think of just one day of doing that, but doing it every day for 30 days straight can be a challenge. So the first year I tried it, I hit my 50K word count, but I hadn't finished the book that I was working on because it was longer. So I chose to keep up the habit into December that year and through the holidays just to finish the book that I was working on. And the result was that I accidentally surpassed that 2-month mark, those 66 days, and made myself a good habit for life. And it's been years now and I haven't gone away from that. So I averaged 2 books a year because of it ever since then, and it wouldn't be possible without discipline. Another exercise I took on a couple years ago was an AU, or alternate universe a day challenge for a full month, which can easily just be tailored to a prompt a day challenge. Alternate universe might be more familiar to you if you write fan fiction, where let's say, if you're a huge fan of Harry Potter, every day you take a different AU, such as coffee shop. And then you'd write characters from Harry Potter, but in that modern setting where they're at a coffee shop. And each day would be something different. So whether you take that for fan fiction, or if you just want to use prompts, coffee shop, but you use original characters, is a great exercise for newer writers who are having trouble coming up with ideas, or if you have a ton of ideas but aren't sure how to push yourself to finish something. So this is an entirely, unique prompt a day. It's supposed to be separate stories, not necessarily, completing a full novel like Nano. But you're dabbling in different stories each time, and some might not inspire you at all, and you'll just never touch them again. And others you might love so much that you decide to make that your next project, and that becomes your next book, which has actually happened with me before. You also might pick a few days, separate it out, but you'll connect them together. You'll have one prompt for one day, and then 5 days later, a prompt kind of reminds you of that story, so you decide to just write the next chapter. It's just endless possibilities, and it really just kind of pushes you that last little bit to inspire you to write and help you get into those good habits. You can easily Google prompt lists for a month, or AU a day challenges like I did. Endless supply of them, just to kind of get things flowing, especially if you're experiencing writer's block. And that actually segues nicely into the next question I'm most often asked, which is, how do you adapt a fanfic into an original novel? There's a reason I want to answer this question before getting into more original general story tips, because a lot of what I'll tell people if they're working on a fanfic adaptation still applies for original ideas, or at least can connect everything nicely together. So I love fanfiction. I don't plan to ever stop writing it or being part of fandoms that make me smile and make me happy. I'm also a published author, but most of my books are actually adapted fanfics, because they're the stories I pour my soul into. And if I can change them into something that a wider audience might enjoy, I love the idea of doing that and pulling in more readers. And I think it's great when other writers do as well. I spent months, years sometimes writing fanfics, and they are no less impactful or important as a literary tool than original books. So for me, they often become my original books. And a lot of people wonder how to go about doing this themselves. So, that's also one of the big questions I'm asked. When they look at their library of fan fiction, how do they do this? So I think it kind of comes down to 5 main steps. First, you got to choose a viable fanfic to adapt. Not everyone can be adapted into an original idea, at least not without almost completely overhauling everything, which would basically be rewriting it from scratch anyway. So the type of fic that works for an adaptation needs to be one that isn't too reliant on recognizable elements of canon. For example, one of my series, Lovesick, which is a 2-book series, Lovesick Gods and Lovesick Titans, is adapted from a fanfic of the CW TV series version of The Flash. But the overarching storyline that I wrote at the time has nothing to do with anything from the comics or the show or any storyline they had tackled. It was my own concept, even using a Flash villain at the time who hadn't yet been introduced on the TV series. So my concept for him was entirely my own interpretation. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't elements of the fic that are tied to canon. How could they not be? It was written as fan fiction, and the characters themselves have pasts and reactions based on who they were in canon to get them to where they are at the start of my story. But what matters is whether or not those things can be given different motivations that work outside of canon, and that the main plot is something uniquely its own. So that leads to step 2, unique world building. Now, this depends on the type of story. If you're dealing with superheroes like I was, then their abilities probably play an important role in the story. You're obviously going to need to have superpowers or magic or something that allows for that to happen. So maybe you do something slightly different. Is it mutants? Is it aliens? Is it magic? Is it a miracle for just one or two people? What sort of world are your characters in that can set it apart from the source material? Obviously, if you're adapting your favorite coffee shop, you already did the world building, or it's just our normal world. So it's already kind of there for you. And there's probably going to be a lot less work. But if your plot is rooted in a world that isn't our normal world, you have to think about what can make it unique from canon. Which leads to step 3, which is backstory. Backstory being more focused on individual characters, whereas world building is the world at large. So fan fiction is arguably easier to write than original fiction because you don't have to give your characters backstory or flush out all the little details. We go into reading a fic with the assumptions in place because we know these characters already. This actually gives you a lot of freedom as a writer because readers already know so much about the characters. You can just jump right in without describing things the readers are already aware of. Original stories don't have that luxury, so you need to decide, if you skipped all that, which you probably did for a fic, what are your characters' motivations? How do you need to tie in all these little pieces that had been skipped because canon already expects us to know them? Why are they in the situations they're in? And you need to keep, again, all of that as unique as you can. So you also need to be careful of not falling into this trap of exposition dumps to include all these new backstory elements. They need to come up organically, and they don't always need to be explained to death in order to work or for things to make sense. And that's a tough thing to learn over time. I think part of that comes with practice. But most of the time, just saying, here's everything you need to know is just pure exposition up front isn't the way to solve that problem. But you don't have to change everything. So let's say your character having dead parents is integral to the plot. Fine, keep it that way. But maybe change how they died, when they died, or some other element to that situation. Say 2 characters are friends and they still need to be. Great, change how or when they became friends. Change things about them, like their occupations, or other ways that they're connected. Maybe instead of friends, somebody is siblings. And then whatever you do, make sure that if there are certain integral threads that still need to happen, they still happen even if you change elements of them. Step 4 is the easiest, I'd say, and pretty obvious. It's just you have to change character names and what they look like. You have to, especially if they're recognizable. There's something like Harry Potter, again, as an example, he's got the lightning scar, right? If you describe a character with that scar and glasses and green eyes and the dark hair, everyone's going to know Harry Potter. You have to change that. Now, this can actually be fun, but it's more than just changing hair or eye color. If you change a character's race or gender or something else fundamental about them, you have to be really careful. Does what you change everything to still resonate for how that character interacts in the story? Conversely, how can it resonate differently on purpose to tell the same heart of the story without being identical? Sometimes something they went through that might have been tied to their gender, maybe you have a way of making it work because they're a different race or because they're a different background or a different culture. Like, can you still tell the heart of the same story but in a different way? And sometimes that can be fun too, because then you're getting to highlight people that maybe aren't as highlighted as often in canon universes. And so that can be a lot of fun. My series, The Incubus Saga, is also based off of a fanfic, that one being off of the series Supernatural. A long time ago, when Supernatural was still during its first seasons. I was writing it while seasons 3 through 5 were airing, is when I was writing it. So a long, long time ago. And I made the 2 main characters twins instead of brothers, and everything about their past and their life and their motivations were completely different. I also swapped the birth order so that the Dean character, or in my books, Nathan, he's actually the younger brother by 2 minutes since they're twins instead of older. Because my main plot there was very different from anything the show tackled, like I did a completely different story very early on before things got really deeply entrenched in all of their organic lore. The fact that these characters are twins and how they relate to each other because of that plays an important role. It kept them distinct as characters from who they were inspired by. The last step for this is you want to have an editor after you're done making all of your changes, both from inside the fandom the fanfic originally came from and one from without who knows nothing about it. having at least one editor outside of yourself, like besides you, is completely necessary for any writer always. But when you're adapting a fic, I think it's important to have someone read through your story who knows the fandom well and can determine if there are still elements remaining that might tread toward copyright infringement or just being really blatant and obvious. If you've drastically changed things, you shouldn't have any issues, especially if the fic started as an alternate universe story itself, but it's still worth investing time in a reader from the fandom. I also think it's helpful to have someone read through your story who is unfamiliar to make sure that any other outside reader doesn't think something is missing that maybe you didn't notice because your head was kind of still living in canon and you didn't realize you hadn't fleshed things out enough for an original audience. Then it's just about editing based on that feedback to get your story polished enough to be ready for publishing. The hardest part is step one, choosing the right fic to start with. But if you follow these steps, it's possible to submit your last fanfic to a publisher as an original idea, and I highly encourage people to do it. A lot of this advice is still very applicable for those of you starting from scratch with an original idea. So now I'm going to expand into that. Just sort of general writing advice, regardless of where that idea is coming from. How do you get from your concept to chapter 1 and beyond, besides just the writing habits and some practices? Because hopefully you have a lot of ideas, or at least one that's been nagging at you to be written. And if not, like I said, I already gave you some exercises to help generate ideas. Once you know what you're going to be writing, where do you go from there? So every story is different because you have to decide, are you going to write in past tense or present tense? Third person limited, third person omniscient, first person? Do you want to give a prologue backstory to set up your world, which can sometimes work really well, as long as it's not too exposition heavy? Or do you want to jump into an action scene and then flash back, or just start with something simple that introduces the character? Honestly, you just need to start writing and see what happens. And even if it feels off later, you can move what you wrote at the beginning to further down and write something different for the opening. No writing time is wasted time. I can't stress that enough. No writing time, no long paragraph, no dump of pages, even if you don't use them later, is wasted time. Because there isn't an easy way to stumble upon what opening is going to be best for each story. Chances are if something is kind of bugging you and it just feels off and you can't get past it, you're probably right and you're going to want to do something different. So when in doubt, I like to try different options if I'm having trouble, and then share that concept and what I'm thinking with as many people as possible. Because often just talking it out can really change your perspective, and suddenly like the light bulb goes and you know, oh, I should do it like this. Or somebody else can just have a really great idea. For example, my current work in progress is a fairy tale. And I shared the summary with one of my publisher's editors when I was first considering submitting it. And she made the point that how I had set things up from the summary, the main romantic interest characters might not even meet in chapter 1, which for a story that's intended to be a romantic fairy tale doesn't really work. From her perspective, having worked with, gosh, I don't even know how hundreds, maybe even thousands of books, you want the readers to see how these characters interact as soon as possible so that they get invested in the romance to come, especially if that's going to be the focus. So it was great advice. It caused me to start over with how I was considering how they were going to meet and what that first chapter was going to look like. So I actually started with when they meet, and then I described how did they get to that point in the flashback, and then I resumed that initial scene. I use that device in other books as well so that you can kind of like jump people into the world. I like it. It doesn't work with everything, but I think it can be a lot of fun to be like, oh, this is the world we're going to be in. Okay, now let's give some backstory and then continue. Also, please, 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 besides not deleting, thinking that anything's wasted, don't delete paragraphs, don't delete like long scenes. If you decide to cut something and it's longer than like a few words as you're editing, put it in a separate document and save it as its own file, as like a cut file. Sometimes I'll have folders for them, because you might change your mind later and you'll be kicking yourself for deleting it. And never delete files. Like if you have files of old stories, oh, but this sucks, I don't want this anymore. Don't do it. You never know when you might go back and be happy that you saved it. Everything you write has merit and is worth the time, even if it's never published for anybody else to see but you. So now we're getting to the point with a story where in the beginning, nothing is more important, at least for me, than notes. So they say there are two types of writers, and those of us who fall into a third category, somewhere in between. The ones who plan out everything to the letter before they write, and those who write by the seat of their pants, allowing the characters and writing process to sort of dictate where the story goes. or as George R.R. Martin put it, the architects and the gardeners, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard before. So even those of us who would staunchly consider ourselves architects will often change things when our characters surprise us, and a little gardening is needed. But I think it's also important for gardeners at the very least retroactively do some heavy planning, which I mean take notes as you write, and brainstorm ideas that you can then easily reference later when you're editing. So I kind of fall middle of the road. As the story moves forward, I'll find myself altering even the biggest plot points sometimes. But this is made so much easier by taking excessive notes from the start of the writing process. So again, that nothing feels wasted. Like title ideas, all written down before I've chosen it. Character bios and physical descriptions. I love making big character profiles for all my main characters, all down. Snippets of dialogue as they come to me. The start of an outline, if I kind of have an idea of where I want certain things to go when I'm first getting going. Usually for me, only the start of it, because eventually I'll have notes about plot points and various reveals and pertinent details, but usually I get everything I can possibly written down as notes, and not always or all that often in the correct order. And then I'll actually write the first chapter before I finish all of those notes and all of the outlining. Maybe I'll even write the next 2 to even 5 chapters, checking my notes the whole time, adding more to them, and moving things around. And then after I've gotten a little further into the meat of it and I start to really feel the world and who the characters are, I'll flush out my outline based on where the characters have taken me. At this point, I try to mark everything down, more so if I've missed anything, or move things to show which future chapter should they come in. So more formal outline, putting all of my notes in order so that later I can easily see, okay, oh shoot, are there any plot holes? Did I miss something that should be brought up again later or maybe sooner? Or maybe stuff that isn't necessary and I can just remove. And then I keep writing. And believe me, every time that outline, even if I've finished it about halfway through, it's going to get adjusted. It's going to get shifted around. But I'm always glad I have it. Another great tool to use is a GMC chart. That stands for Goal, Motivation, Conflict. You can Google that for various templates to use, but those 3 main points are also split into 2 columns then, internal and external. This is specifically for your main characters. You start with their basic character info, describe their personality, their past, how and why they ended up where they are at the start of the story. But the harder part comes in describing the external and internal goals, motivations, and conflicts to flush out what they want, why they want it, and what they need to overcome during the story to achieve it. You can see why this is useful, especially when first plotting a story. But it's harder than you might think to take what seems obvious to you as the author and make sure everything comes across well in the events and obstacles your characters face. You don't need to do this for every single character, but at least the protagonist, or like for me, since I do romances, the 2 main characters. And never forget to ask the question, why? For everything. For the purpose of what? Because if the answer is plot convenience, you need to rethink it. Try your best to fit this exercise onto a single page for each character, a single page. Be concise but specific, and no matter how much it may hurt, I promise you'll pull back afterward and have a better understanding of your characters and how to make the best version of their story. Now for the even harder part, because trust me, very little of writing is easy. How do you get published? The publishing industry has drastically changed with the rise of digital, ebooks, audiobooks, and just how accessible finding books has become. It makes the landscape entirely different than it was 20, even 10, or just 5 years ago. So first, you can certainly try to find an agent, but it is not the norm that it used to be, and very few, if any, publishers require it anymore. What is most important if you want to send your manuscript to a publisher is to find ones that are the best fit for you, especially if you have a niche or specific genre. It's like me, I write MM romance. Obviously, there are specific publishers best suited for that. If you write purely speculative fiction, nonfiction, contemporary fiction, romance, mystery, there are countless publishers specific to those genres. So target them. Look at books they've published that might be similar to yours. Read their submission guidelines as closely as if you were studying for the most important test of your life, and submit to as many publishers as you can. Now, with that said, Some publishers require that if you send them something, you can't also send it elsewhere while they're reviewing it, because they don't want to accept it and then have somebody else accept it, and then there's like a fight over it. Like, they don't want to deal with that. So they tell you, no, you can't do multiple submissions like that, which can be frustrating because it means you'll send something to one publisher, you'll wait 2 months to hear back, which is a very typical time frame. And then if they reject you, you have to start over. So it's grueling and long, especially early on if you've never been published before. But it's worth it, because once you find the publisher for you, and it might take a long time to find them, you get to skip most of the rigmarole in the future. Most publishers will make it way easier for authors they've worked with in the past anytime they're going to do additional books, especially if you've been successful with this. The other thing to remember is that self-publishing is completely viable and doable for everybody. So say you've written your book, you edited it, you've had others edit it, and you've decided against traditional publishers, or maybe you're just sick of waiting on the right one to bite at your idea. Next comes typesetting. So that means properly formatting your book so that it looks good to readers, whether in paperback or as an ebook. And they're not the same. Different rules apply. So you can't just simply use one file for both and expect it to look right. I often recommend this book by a fellow author I worked with in the past at Big World Network, Heather Justison. She published many years ago this book called POD like Pro, POD for print on demand. And in it, even though it's older, a lot of these rules still apply and are still very helpful. She goes through a lot of the basics and rules that you need to know. The book is on Amazon if you want to Google it, but you can certainly look up tips in general, search for programs that will do some of the formatting for you, hire a freelancer to help if you can afford it or want to spend the money, or just use the tools available on CreateSpace, which is now owned by Amazon, and they make it pretty easy. But I personally think it's nice if you actually have somebody who knows what they're doing to do it for you, rather than relying on a program. The typesetting, if you do it yourself, will absolutely be the most challenging thing to learn from a technical standpoint. Once you have that down to where it looks good, you're basically set and never need to rely on someone else again. I mean, it's more important on the paperbook side, because obviously in print, it needs to look very specifically a certain way more. So like ebooks are a little easier, but don't underestimate how much a book looks on the page affects whether people will want to read it. Next, then, of course, is the cover art. I mean, maybe you are a great illustrator. Maybe you're great at Photoshop, or you know people who are one of those two things. But you have to take this step seriously, too, because we all know that don't judge a book by its cover is never true. I mean, everyone does it all the time and will for your book as well. Just like with finding the right publisher, if you're going to do it alone, check out what other covers look like in your genre. That's the style your readers are likely going to be looking for. Not to say you want to copy, but you just want to be in line, so it looks like the same family, or like it would be on the same shelf in a genre section at a bookstore. Again, there are freelancers and services out there if you don't have the skills yourself, or if you don't know anybody. So definitely, check that out, see if you can find good resources for that. But it's going to depend on whether you're more illustration focused, or if you like the look of photo manipulation with Photoshop. Finally, before you make your book live, you have to hype it up and get ahead of marketing. And this is, again, one of the hardest things. And I know I've said that a few times, but no part of it is easy. It's definitely true. One of the most important things is getting reviews right away. And I know that might seem like a paradox, like how do I get reviews if no one's read it yet? You can contact bloggers and reviewers to read and review your book ahead of release. You can pay for blog tours that will often have reviews available, along with usually if you do these types of tours, there'll be other options as well, like guest posts where you write an article for them, interviews where they'll let you pick certain questions to answer, or just general promotion. Here's the book, here's the description, here's links to find it and purchase it. But some will also do reviews. You can also just give away free copies of your book in exchange for honest reviews. But notice how I say honest. Paying for a blog tour or paying someone to just read the book doesn't mean the tour stops or that person are getting paid to give you a good review. They'll give you the review they feel you deserve, and might even request to not leave a review to avoid having to leave you a bad one. If you pay people directly for a good review or request that they give you a 5-star because you gave them a free copy, those reviews are going to come off stiff and sound as fake as they are, and it doesn't convince people to want to pick up your story. And it definitely doesn't help you grow as a writer. So please don't do that. How much you want to spend on tours is up to you, but it is worth it, I think, to spend a couple to even a few $100s before release on all of your marketing, but a good chunk to these types of promotions because they'll reach that many more people. Then it's about sharing all of it as it happens on your website, which you should have if you're starting to build an author brand, on any of your social sites, and potentially if you have an email newsletter for people to sign up to as well, promoting it there. Another great tactic to pull in readers is drawings or giveaways. Many tour sites will also just do this for you, or it's like a natural part of their packages. So you just need to supply the book or the ebook files to them at the end so they can pass it along. The best way to find the right tour sites and blogs and pages like this for you is to really just Google them related to your genre, just like when you were looking for a publisher. I also recommend joining author groups on Facebook. There are dozens upon dozens for each type of genre, for authors, for people who are recommending things or looking for recommendations. Again, just Google and start to look for it specific to your genre, where then you could discuss potentially with other authors what is working best for them. Now, once your book is out there and the reviews are coming in and you're promoting like crazy, how do you handle the bad reviews? So you're a published author, you've had the book edited, typeset, you love the cover, you're promoting it as best you can, and you're still getting negative reviews. It's not that you don't know to expect this, but it feels like a blow every time. You can get 10 good reviews and 1 bad, and I guarantee you, you will obsess over the bad one. But try to remember, unless you're overwhelmingly getting more bad than good, it's simply a matter of personal preference, and there's really not much you can do to prevent it. Think of your favorite book of all time. For me, one of my favorites is Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. So I tell you, do the same thing. Think of it. What's your favorite book? Or even Good Omens, if you like it and you want to check this one out. Look it up on Goodreads and then read some of the 1-star reviews. I guarantee you, no matter what book you're choosing, if it's your favorite, it's going to have some 1 stars. Even something you love can get destroyed by people who it just didn't work for. I mean, you know that's true for movies you've seen, TV shows you love. It's true for books too. Some people will say nothing but glowing things, but then they'll just give you a 3 or a 4-star review. So, and you'll be like boggling your mind. Why didn't they give me a 5? They only said good things. Or some will give you a 5, but then they'll like really rag on something specific that they didn't like. It doesn't make sense because there isn't a standard for it, right? We're all people, we all have different opinions, and it's going to be frustrating some days. In the same day, I have had someone give a book 5 and praise how well I handled character relationships and the romance and how they connected, and then had someone give a 1 saying like verbatim the exact opposite. And I mean, you just can't, you don't know how people are going to react. There also are some people that I like to call serial reviewers. So let's say you get a review that seems especially like mean-spirited and really not in line with what most other people are saying. Look into that person on Goodreads and see, well, what do they normally do? What do they normally give? Knowing that most reviews are between a 1 and a 5, if somebody has like hundreds, thousands of ratings and reviews they've given books, and their average is less than 3, that means they're mostly giving 1s and 2s, right? I personally think you can just kind of ignore that. I feel like they just kind of, they just want to say what they want to say, and it's always going to be nearly impossible to please those people. So you don't want to like beat yourself up over it if those people who are often going to give lower reviews are giving you a lower review. Now, at the same time, pay attention to it though. It's going to hurt to read them, but the worst review that makes you feel like crap might be saying something that can help you improve as a writer. So as hard as it is, it's only going to make you better to look at it. If it's not worthwhile, if it's just mean-spirited or it's contradictory to what other people are saying, or you personally disagree, you don't think they're right, fine, let it go. Just try to ignore it and move past it. But if it's something you're like, well, you know, I could have done that better, I'm going to work on making that better for my next book, take it as a growth opportunity rather than letting it just tear you down. It's still going to hurt, but please don't use the fear of bad reviews as a reason to not give publishing a try. I've heard people say that before. It breaks my heart. I don't want that to be what stops people from sharing their stories, because the good ones, the people you reach and have an impact on, are worth all the rest. So finally, to wrap this up, and I'm pretty impressed, I think I'm staying within an hour here. I'd like to end on just 3 additional general tips to get my fellow writers motivated. So 1, and I love this quote, you can kill a vampire however you want because vampires don't exist. Now, it might sound weird. So first of all, if you've never watched The Death and Return of Superman by Max Landis, covering the comics of the same name, please do. There's a particular spot in this amazing little 16-minute short film, real close to the end, like just past the 15-minute mark, where they bring up vampires as just an example, presenting the idea that sometimes writers question the right way to do something, such as how do you kill a vampire? Well, we all come up with, right, sunlight, stake through the heart. No, you can kill a vampire however you want because vampires don't exist. There is no right way to write fiction, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. 2, cliches aren't always bad. There's a fine line between subverting expectations and giving readers what they want. Fiction fails at proper catharsis all the time, whether with deaths, romance, or any other plot point. For me, it's about pacing, but also about finding those moments when something seems obvious. Maybe even the writer purposely allows it to stay obvious, and then you do something completely different in the end, especially if it's a trope that's getting tired. So like the liar reveal, where the truth comes out, the wronged party is angry, and characters are at odds for however long before making up at some critical moment. Why not let the wronged person be understanding or not think it's that big of a deal sometimes? It just becomes so tired because we see the same thing over and over again. So set it up sometimes like you're gonna do what people expect and then do something different. But on the opposite side, sometimes readers want what they expect to happen. Sometimes we want the happy ending. We want the liar reveal blow up. Or we want the characters that are in a heated argument to end in a passionate kiss, even if it is cliche, and we cheer when it happens. I think the best advice here is to think about the moments that you personally love when you're consuming fiction. Then as you plot where those types of moments happen in your story, make sure enough builds into them to make them earned, and without being too obvious, but still with enough hints that they are inevitable to feel satisfying when the payoff comes. And in the right cases, when you can flip the story on its head and do something different without alienating the expectations of readers, do it. Honestly, it's better to err on the side of unique storytelling than sticking with the norm, but that doesn't mean cliches don't have their place. And again, always keep in mind, you can't please everyone. Finally, number 3, this is the most important one. I say it all the time. It's why I wanted to do this panel. And I'm sad that we can't be doing it in person. But writing is about community. Meet fellow authors, make friends with editors, participate in things like NaNoWriMo. It's something you do kind of on your own, but the website for Nano, and please Google it if you haven't looked it up before, there are forums, there are groups where people help cheer each other on. Participate in that. Go to conventions, whether it's in person or virtual like this, because sometimes there are meet and greet spaces where you can still talk to people, or live panels where you could discuss with the person right off the bat. Go to readings of other people, do readings yourself, participate in Facebook groups and try to converse with people. The great thing about being an author is that we are not in competition with each other. We're not. People always want more to read. If they like one thing, they might like another. I mean, think of yourself as a reader. For me, sometimes I'll consume a particular story and then I want to read that same scenario again, just told differently. I mean, people do it all the time. That's why we're not competing with each other. We're just competing with ourselves to be better at what we're writing, because there's always going to be somebody that's going to want to read more. It's not like a car, where if someone buys a car, then they're not going to buy, they're not going to buy another car for years. People who are, have huge TBR, to be read piles for a reason. So help each other however you can. Be positive, be supportive. Let's say you hate a book you just read and you feel obligated to write a more negative review. Try to be nice about it. Try to be constructive about it. Think about how you would want somebody to tell you something. And I failed at this too, because if we don't like something, we can kind of riled up about it. But think about that person from the other side. If it was you and you just happened to hit someone on a bad day when they were reading it and it just didn't resonate with them for whatever reason, you don't want them to be tearing you down. Don't tear others down. There's no reason we can't all help each other be better and succeed. And as I get older, I think I'm finding it easier to do that, and it makes me cringe at myself for times when I didn't. There's no reason we can't help each other. So I hope my ramblings have been helpful. Please feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in any more advice. I'm sure I could talk for another hour easily about things that I've experienced, because I both have self-published and I've worked with multiple publishers, so I have a wide array of experience in how this works. I've edited for others. I've had people edit mine. I kind of run the gamut here of how some of this works. So I'm happy to answer follow-up questions if anybody wants to contact me. Or, of course, if you want to ask me anything about my books and what I have available. Again, you can best find me at my website, amandameuwissen.com. Again, Meuwissen is Meuwissen, or Google my name. I'm the only one. At least the only one I believe in the United States. I also have a private Facebook group. It's plenty open for new members. I still have people go through a raise your hand kind of process before I accept, but I pretty much accept everybody into the group, where I every day of the week, each weekday, I'll post something small that's either about writing, about my work, things coming up, stuff like that. And then I hope to be at more conventions, maybe even in person again sometime soon, where I love to dress up and sign books to sell to people in person and give personal advice. So thanks again for joining me. Thank you, Convergence, for setting this up, even though we couldn't all be there together. And have a great rest of your night.